Okay, so basically kind of just like compile all the information that we have kind of discussed and it was out there, and then also added some like research article information for the Indian community. So basically the barriers that were primarily identified was the fact that there are 22 different languages in India, which makes like, whereas here everyone speaks English, so it's kind of easier to have people understand resources and to make different resources in languages. There's also 5 different religions, which where that falls in is more the cultural differences between the groups. So even though people are like Indian, there's still very distinct differences in cultures between people. There's a general misunderstanding of what autism is in general, and then therefore also a lack of knowledge on the treatments and therapy that are available. And their misunderstanding also leads to a lack of support from the community, which can lead to things like families not going to get diagnosis or ignoring if things are wrong, or using Indian approaches of like changing your parenting style or like homeopathic things to treat, and then the families in general being isolated from everyone else in their community. I think the biggest barrier is language, just in terms of like resources and communicating with families. The translations that we found are all mostly in Hindi, and even though it's the national language, most people still don't understand it, speak it, or read it. So having those resources for the Indian community don't necessarily target the community as a whole. So I kind of broke down like what the 7 or 8 main languages are, or biggest languages. So if we wanted to go the route of having more translations, it would probably be beneficial to add these languages. And then there are like videos and stuff out there in different translations, but I can't speak to how accurate they are. So then just some research that we found. So in this article, it looked to beliefs that families had regarding autism. And a lot of them included like immunizations, toxins, karma, destiny, parents' mistakes being the cause of the child having autism. And that can go into like a lot of religious, like Hindus and stuff like that. The destiny, karma, parents' past life mistakes fall into kind of that category of their beliefs. And then they looked into if most families with children with autism were using Western approaches or Indian approaches. Most families used a combination, and Indian approaches usually include things like Ayurvedics and homeopathy. But then the study did say that most of the families that were part of the study were very educated. So that can influence like the knowledge base that the families have regarding autism. Another study looked at the family's concerns, which included like challenging parent, like learning how to parent, caring for their child, and finding a sense of belonging for their child in the community. A lot of the barriers that they found were parents saying things like boys just talk late, or deficits in functioning is typical for children. They don't think it's like a necessarily like a medical diagnosis and something that's like going to affect the child forever, or they just haven't heard of autism, and so they kind of disregard that anything's wrong. And then this was really interesting. It's basically saying that the families, they found like even though they had deficits in functioning, they didn't see it as a big problem. And then even after diagnosis, they kind of disregarded it as being like a medical problem that they had to target. And after long periods of time where the problem was worsening and persisting is when they possibly were kind of considering like, okay, like maybe we should do something about it. But at that point, it's so far into like the child's behaviors and shaping up to like such a bad degree. And then this was really interesting. There was a study about using the Vineland in Indians, and this was interesting because barriers that we found in this study was just that the cultural differences in boys versus girls, or what kids are allowed to do, or what parents expect out of the kids, were different than what the Vineland would measure for. So things like boys not doing things such as housework, or girls or boys like not being able to really go out with friends or go on dates, being alone, having jobs at a young age, and moving out, using utensils, because a lot of Indians eat with their hands. So those were just all barriers associated to like even when we do assessments with families with from India, being aware of those things. So moving forward, just in terms of how we want to target, like we can go through the religious and cultural groups, we can go through nonprofits in the organization. I don't know if we could find people in the community that are from like each different culture that could be a resource, making more translations, hopefully making just more pamphlets and brochures to give for the resources to doctors so that hopefully they can be just more culturally aware when they come in contact with leading families towards diagnosis and things like that. But that is all I have.